Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. And we have here with us Kevin and Kate. And thank you very much for coming on. Just a little quick, we'll just kind of like go around, pass around just a little bit of background about each person, I guess how you got involved with the Karen Reed case. And then I like to really just jump right into it, have the discussion. A lot of people have been asking me about, having a discussion and talking with other lawyers. Initially, I thought, maybe I need another lawyer because, we kind of know how evidence works and different rules and things like that. But I haven't really gotten any lawyers to really bite. But it seems that Kevin and Kate were nice enough to come on and join. And hopefully we can have a nice, respectful, civil discussion. We may disagree, and maybe we'll find that we actually agree on a lot of things. Who knows? So let's see where the conversation goes. But just initially, my name is Martin Radner. I have Radner Law Group. And I mostly concentrate on civil work these days, which means personal injury or civil rights. That's mostly what I do, some commercial litigation as well. I do a little bit of criminal defense as well now, but I'm kind of moving past that and moving mostly concentrating on the civil work. But I did catch my eye on the Karen Reed case, and that happened a couple months before it started. I started this channel just about 1.5 years ago, so it's a pretty young channel. And one of the first cases that one of the cases that caught my eye, obviously, was Karen Reed. And I thought just very, very interesting. Definitely a lot of the legal issues that were brought up. And anytime that there's good lawyering, I enjoy that. And I enjoy breaking that down and explaining that. So that's what caught my interest. And I've been following this case from about January of 2024. So I think that was January 2024 or January 2023. I forgot which one it was. Probably January 2024.
It was April.
So, okay, so that's kind of my background. Let's pass around. Kate, you want to go?
Yeah, so I'm sure that just about everybody in your chat knows I'm Kate. I am the Free Karen Reed cult's devil. So Satan herself incarnate. Lovely to be here.
Sure. First, I want to thank you because, what you said you're aspiring to do here is have polite and civil discussion based on evidence and logic. And that's really what I like. And I want to see more of that. And people, it's also a really good opportunity because what happens is people go into their echo chambers and everybody on one side and everybody else on the other side, and they're missing out on a lot of key evidence and logic and stuff like that. I try to base everything. I do base everything off of stuff that I see in the documents or that was in the trial, in the testimony. As far as, I began covering this case when I got texts on the morning of April 18th, 2023, and people in law enforcement saying, please go to this site. And they gave me a link to Turtle Boy's site. I'd never been there. I had heard of him, but I'd never been there before. I'd never seen him or anything like that. And it looked like, well, first of all, it was clear that what we were getting was a defense theory that had been given to him. Okay. And you had to recognize that just common sense wise, that it wasn't based on research. It was based on he's advocating a particular theory. That didn't mean it was wrong. And I was ignorant about a great many things, such as forensic data, autopsies, how evidence is stored. I mean, just so many aspects of the case. And it was kind of clear then and way more clear now that the defense was exploiting a lot of that. But when you looked at the data, to me, data was just data then. I didn't know otherwise. And when we were told that Jen McCabe made that search at 2:27 a.m., I was like, there has to be something here, And I kept asking questions because the idea of putting the victim out on your own lawn and he's not dead, you put him out purposely alive to die in the cold, never made any sense to me. And then when I saw in a hearing in early June that the prosecution had their own independent forensic data expert that said this didn't happen at 2:27. All three of these searches happened at 6:23. Now I'm like, all right, all bets are off here. I don't know what the truth is on 2:27, but I've got to keep digging. And that's all I've ever done, which is keep digging ever since.
Okay, well, I guess that's a great way to start. I'll tell you, when I first heard about that as well, that 2:27 a.m. search, that's really got me really curious. And, usually Celebrate doesn't lie. And you can't manipulate it. And if there's something there, then that's really, really interesting. But I always, like I tell my channel, I tell all my viewers that I try to wait until I see how this all plays out in trial. So, I'm seeing things in filings. I'm seeing references to some searches and, maybe attachments of some sort of evidence. But to me, the best evidence that I like to base my opinions are the evidence that I actually see in trial under the scrutiny of cross-examination, using certain rules of evidence, rules of criminal procedure. That's the evidence I like to rely on. So I was going to kind of hold judgment on that until I actually saw how the testimony came out in trial. So what I saw was we had those two experts from the prosecution side. We had Jessica, remind me.
Jessica Hyde.
Jessica Hyde and Ian
Whiffen.
Whiffen. And they explained it very clearly why they believe that 227 search did not happen at 227. And then you had Richard Green testify that, it did happen. So, but once I heard from those prosecution experts, I have to tell you myself that, like I've told my channel already, I'm not convinced that she actually did that search at 227. I'm just not, because I thought those prosecution experts were good. I thought that they were very qualified. Definitely Jessica Hyde, I thought, was extremely qualified, the way that she spoke about it and explained it very clearly. And what I would have liked to see on the defense side, and if I was a defense, I would have had Richard Green watch their testimony and then explain to everybody why everything that they're saying is false, and not just say, yeah, I did my research and I think it came out at 227. So to be honest with you, that's not a point I'm going to really argue with you about, because I definitely have my doubts whether Richard Green is actually the better expert on that. I definitely can hear why Jessica Hyde and Ian Whiffen would be better experts. Go ahead, Kate.
Sorry. So but it goes beyond at this point the battle of the experts, because, if we look at the whole breadth of Richard Green's testimony on cross, he conceded that he made a misinterpretation of that data that resulted in Celebrate changing one of two programs, was the way he kind of, backtracked out of it. But so it's not so much at this point who's the better expert. And of course, Ian Whiffen is the senior digital intelligence analyst for Celebrate, right? So he's involved in the coding and the upkeep of these programs. They have since updated the software. This is in filings, and we knew that it was coming during testimony because, again, Ian Whiffen testified to it, and Richard Green did as well, as far as the software update. So they've updated the software, and now this misleading timestamp no longer exists. And that search is very, very unfortunate, because that search was the linchpin that enabled thousands of people to demonize and vilify Jennifer McCabe, and her family, and her life has suffered immensely because of that. And I think it's pretty definitive at this point in time that search just simply didn't exist. And I mean, it was testified to by, again, two experts and Richard Green himself.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll tell you that, like, in terms of, who's got the burden of proof here. So if you're trying to prove that there was a conspiracy based on that search, then I would argue to you back that there's definitely reasonable doubt whether that search was done at 227 when you have two qualified experts saying that it wasn't. So in terms of, if that is your linchpin to prove your case that there's a conspiracy, then I would definitely hear the argument that if you have two experts saying it didn't happen that time, that would be enough reasonable doubt. So in terms of that, and in terms of what Richard Green testified, Richard Green did testify. What I remember is that he did say that there were two versions of Celebrate, but these two versions were being actively used on the market. And that's where he was kind of saying, well, how can Celebrate put out one version that's saying that you can have the timestamp and then still have the other version active where it does have the timestamp? So that was kind of his, what I remember, which was a little bit of his answer to what's going on here. But let's, with that, I think I don't think we're going to argue too much on this, because
if I could just add one thing to it, Martin, because you can also debunk this without going to the experts. There was a witness in trial, one of the paramedics, that said Karen Reed, when she was being put in protective custody on the ambulance, I think about 20 minutes later, she asked pretty much the exact same question that Jen McCabe said that she asked. How long would it take someone to die in the cold? So this confirms that that's what she was asking Jen. And just even the logic of 227, that Jen McCabe is going to go home and she's searching for her child's basketball league and kissing her kids, and all while she's planning to be part of a murder conspiracy. And the Apple Health app shows that her heart rate is completely normal. It's just debunked on so many levels. It's not rational to believe in 227 anymore.
Yeah. Okay. So let's kind of move on from the 227, because 227 to me it's a battle of the experts. And, I would say that there's reasonable doubt one way or the other. If this is what you're trying to prove your conspiracy theory, then you're going to have to come up with some other evidence as well. Now, again, when it comes to conspiracies, like we found with Michelle Trocona's case, and I don't know if you're familiar with that case, but you need a lot of circumstantial evidence tied all together in order to kind of prove of a conspiracy theory. But using now that we're talking about the experts when it comes to the 227 search, let's kind of move on to the experts, the ARCA experts, because to me, when I was watching this trial the whole time, keeping an open mind, that's what I try to do, at least. The ARCA experts for me is what really sealed the deal that there's definitely reasonable doubt there. And that's what I felt that at this point, if the Commonwealth is not going to have a real biomechanical engineer, a real expert at the same qualifications or similar qualifications as these two other experts to be able to testify that, no, these injuries and the damage to the vehicle are consistent with this being a motor vehicle pedestrian strike, well, then that itself is going to be reasonable doubt. And therefore, the verdict has to be not guilty. So what would your response be to the ARCA experts?
Go ahead, Kate.
Kevin. So I mean, under cross again, they did kind of concede that it was a possibility, and I felt that the way that was it Dr. Wolf or was it? What was the other one?
Dr. Wolf was the
Dr.
first one, and Dr. Rensler,
yeah, Rensler. So kind of concedes, well, it's a possibility. And the way that he framed it was, well, if she, backs up and doesn't know that he's there, the vehicle nudges him, that could cause the head injury. The problem with ARCA is that they were given very narrow parameters with very limited information. And I do think that a huge weak spot, and really probably what contributed to the mistrial in the prosecution's case, is they did not have a qualified expert to counter that. The only thing that I would kind of, ask, and it's a hypothetical at this point, but there is obviously going to be a retrial in April, and from what we can see in discovery, the Commonwealth is not making that mistake again. So presumably they are going to produce an expert that says, yes, this is consistent with a pedestrian vehicle strike, right? Does that automatically convict her on its own?
Well, let's move. I want to still, Kevin, do you have anything to say about the ARCA experts?
Yeah.
Would you agree with everything that Kate said?
Sure. What I would say on the ARCA guys is there's no question that they were the most qualified experts, at least on that subject in the trial. The question is not their ability, their company. That's what they do. They do accident reconstructions. They're extremely qualified. The question is their credibility. And I think this is why the jury, without knowing this much, they sensed that these guys were kind of typical defense experts that can be pulled out in these cases. Defense is always going to find experts to rebut everything, and they weren't impressed by it. Now, the text, if you go to 2021 on the ARCA website, they have an article that they are experts on Toyota tech stream data. This is the crash data that you get, which is a little bit, they have their own tech crash data that similar to the black box, but a different stream. And they knew this was a Lexus Toyota. They made no effort to inquire whether that tech stream data was obtained. They did not have it. Now, this is to me is kind of like a medical examiner doing an autopsy without the body or without even pictures of the body. It's absurd. And for me, it just revealed they weren't interested in the truth. They were interested in pleasing their client, which they knew was the U.S. attorney, who for some reason was going after the state's case on this. I know that sounds like a reach but listen, there's got crazy things happen for these guys not to even ask for. So they're doing tests. They're building a cannon to fire a glass at the taillight, even though they've not been told that that's what the state's theory was, and it wasn't the state's theory. They had no idea what the speed of the vehicle was. I mean, if you're going to do scientific tests, you need to know what speed the vehicle is going. And that data was available in the tech stream, but they didn't reach out to get it. So their testimony is highly suspect on the credibility.
Okay, so in response to that, this is what I would think about it. I mean, I've heard a lot about the argument that they didn't have enough data. They didn't have enough evidence to base their opinions on. And they did say that they were provided this evidence by the entity that hired them, which means that they were not to look outside of this evidence. So they were not supposed to reach out for any tech stream data or any other data besides what we know now is the FBI and the DOJ gave them, right?
Isn't that suspicious though, Martin?
Well, is it suspicious about whether they didn't reach out, or is it suspicious about what the federal government?
Both. I mean, if you're working for a client. And that client doesn't says, I want, if you're a medical examiner, that client says, I want your analysis on this autopsy, but they don't send you anything, the most important information to look at. You're going to be like, what is going on here? Why would you not give me the most fundamental information that I need?
Well, yeah. So I would agree with you that if it's fundamental, I mean, if they felt that this was necessary for them to come to the conclusion, then they should write in their reports, we can't really definitively come to conclusion because we're missing the text stream data. And I think that would be
Bingo.
what an expert, I think that's what an expert would say in his report, which they didn't. What they did say in the report is that we had enough evidence and we could come to our conclusion based on what you gave us. And any other evidence that Lally tried to throw at them, well, you didn't know about the DNA. Yeah, you didn't know about Karen Reed saying, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. You know, you didn't know about, I don't know, anything else that he tried to pull at them. Their response was, we didn't need that data. We didn't need to inspect the actual Lexus. We were able to come to our conclusions based on the evidence that were given to us. Now, if you think about it just logically, this is what I've told my channel before as well. You think about what they're trying to do here. Their scope of work is to determine whether these injuries equal the damage to the vehicle and just figure out a way to recreate that, which means that they're not limited in figuring out any type of scenario, which means that they can come up with a scenario that the Lexus was backing up at 100 miles per hour, you know, did a turnaround and whatever. They can come up there. The sky was the limit. They weren't limited.
And they didn't even try, Martin. The only thing they tried to consider was throwing the glass at the car, and the only position they thought of later was that his arm was out like this, which is absurd. They weren't their methods suggested they weren't after the truth.
But I'm sorry. I don't think that's fair as far as, like, I don't find it suspicious. I don't think it's some sort of conspiracy on the other end here. They were given a very limited scope and they testified to such, right? So I don't think that I don't tend to veer off into this is a conspiracy or it's suspicious per se, but I think that the evidence needs to be weighed accordingly, right? That they were given a very limited scope, limited parameters as to what they were, looking at. And even with that, they conceded that at least part of the Commonwealth's theory, which they were not, aware of, when they were doing their testing. So that kind of, I think, handicaps them, was possible, right? And again, that's why this hypothetical question, I would say if, but it's probably a when, if the Commonwealth produces the contrary to them, would that on its own convict her? And I think the answer is no, right?
So let me just go back to your point here. So I keep hearing that they were giving a very limited amount of evidence. So what I do know that they're given pictures of the vehicle, they were given medical reports, they were given the CDR, they were given pictures of all the debris, all the damage to the vehicle, they're given pictures of John O'Keefe's arm and his injuries, and they had the autopsy reports and the autopsy pictures. So when I keep hearing that, I mean, not just from you, by the way, when I keep hearing they had a very limited amount of evidence, I don't agree with that, because they didn't have a limited amount of evidence. Yes, Lally said you didn't know about the DNA and you didn't know
they didn't know about the vehicle data. That's the most essential information.
And
there was no CDR.
So the CDR didn't have anything on it, but the text
a crash report wasn't produced because they explained because of the size differential between the human body and the vehicle.
Right.
Now the only data was from the text stream. But
right now, let's talk about the text stream, because that's something that Lally did not bring up, by the way. Lally did not bring out the fact that they didn't have the text stream data. That's maybe your point, and maybe if you're the prosecutor, you would argue that. But if you just look at the trial, so the jury didn't hear anything about text stream. But let's just go down this avenue anyway. What is the text stream data going to show? What's it going to show? The speed of the vehicle. So they were not limited in determining or trying to figure out how fast this vehicle is going. They could have run all these tests to figure out how fast the vehicle is going, and that's what they did. They said that even going at 15 miles per hour, which is less than 24, you would expect a lot more damage to the vehicle and a lot more injuries on John O'Keefe. So they considered everything that text stream data would have shown them. So, the fact that they didn't have the text stream data, I don't think really would have made a difference in their analysis and their ultimate opinion. So the question is, okay, what data were they actually missing besides the text stream data? Because to me, that doesn't really mean that they're not reliable. So what were they missing? The DNA?
No, Trooper Paul's report as well. They were missing.
Right, Trooper Paul's report
would be pretty important. I mean, again, like, he was, as a witness, he was terrible. Like, that's indisputable no matter where you fall on this issue. I think, he really could not articulate anything. But from what I understand, the report was pretty thorough, right? So that would be pretty important, because again, when you're looking at the scene and where these items are being found, the shoe, the taillight pieces, the drinking glass, John O'Keefe himself, that would be, again, in combination with the text stream data, I think pretty important to be able to piece together what happened at that scene.
Well, they knew where the shoe was. Oh, go ahead, Kevin.
No, I just want to say, just to respond to both you guys, so what I meant before about suspicious, maybe I don't know if there's a more subtle word, But let's look at it just without getting deep into it. But the same thing with Dr. Russell, okay, the dog bite expert. There's no question she's qualified, but she's making decisions initially based on looking at a photo in a newspaper. And then after that, she's just arguing to the conclusion. She understands now what she understood then when she reached out to the defense, that she was important to them. She's reaching out to the defense in the middle of the trial. She understands what they want. And she's done a lot of work since then to try to firm up her conclusions, thing that she hadn't done during the trial. This is the issue. So whether we want to call it suspicious or dishonest, there's probably some gray area in between, but you're trying to please your client. Those ARCA guys understood what their client wanted. And I'm not saying that they were lying. I'm not saying there was corruption. I'm not saying that the U.S. Attorney's Office had to say, we want you to help prove that Karen Reed is innocent. No. But there's a lot of understanding that's subtle that goes on in this communication here. Anybody that is an expert for, you must, as a lawyer, must see this. You get experts that give you what you want. And those experts have a sense of what you want. And it comes up to their integrity as to whether or not they can still manage to maintain that credibility and be honest about what they're looking at.
Yeah, well, but Kevin, I mean, in order to believe that, you're kind of believing that there's a conspiracy going on with the government. So, you don't want to believe the conspiracy that's going on with, the people that are believing the conspiracy. But now you're creating your own conspiracy.
I want to believe in conspiracy,
but I want to
believe it. Just let me quickly. I'm sorry. I'm not against conspiracies. Okay, I want to make this clear. All right, I understand that there's a public thirst for conspiracies. And that's why you have all these channels that grow up, not just on this case, but many other cases that play to that, despite the evidence. But there are real conspiracies that happen in life all the time. So what I want to do is just follow the evidence. Now, here we have a federal government that the U.S. attorney himself, and I'm sure you've never seen this, actually questioned the witnesses on the stand. This was after knowing that the mob was going after them. And according to the state documents, the U.S. attorney was leaking the times and dates of the testimony of the witnesses before the federal grand jury, leaking that to the defendant, who was using that to harass these people by sicking a mob on them. And they took that, the U.S. attorney, when he did his questioning, took a blown up version of Turtle Boy's article and put that on the stand. So those witnesses, and used that as a basis for his questioning. So the witnesses who were under the heat of that mob, based on information that his department was leaking, come on, there's something. Okay. There's way more to go. There's something really fishy going on here.
Okay, so what really, I really want to kind of limit this to what we saw in trial. So, I mean, you're spinning a pretty fantastic conspiracy theory with the U.S. government, which, maybe you have information about that I don't know of. Your point about experts being hired by attorneys and trying to help their attorneys out, sure, of course I've seen that. You always hire an expert that's going to be more friendly to you. After everything is said and done, an expert can only stretch it so much. Okay, if the science is against you, you're not going to be, no matter how much I pay that expert, they're not going to be able to say something that I want them to say. So yes, experts do work with attorneys. They sometimes bend one way or the other. But when it's something that's so scientifically sound, something that they can say with a straight face, look, the science does absolutely not support this. Go run any equation that you want, any physics equation or any scientific equation, mathematical equation. You're not going to find these results. And they can say that with a straight face. I can never get an expert to say something that's scientifically wrong. Yes, they have their ways of kind of stretching. Is this a fracture? Does it need surgery? Does it need, I know how to play the game a little bit, but when it's so drastic, when it's like physics and science don't lie. Now, coming back to Kate's point about Trooper Proctor's report, if that's the next thing that the ARC expert didn't have, again, I don't think that that's enough, really, again, to really throw suspicion about or take away some of the credibility from these experts. They don't need to see what this other expert, well, if you want to call him an expert, what his report was. They're doing this from new. They're starting from scratch. So they're going to reconstruct this without getting influenced by anybody. That's what their scope of work is supposed to do. So they did know about the shoe. They did know about the hat. And once you think about every single piece of evidence that they allegedly did not have, so you're talking about Trooper Proctor's report, you're talking about the DNA, and then you're talking about, with the fact that Karen Reed said, I hit him. Those three things don't change the physics. So when they're saying, look, the physics is that this interaction could never have happened the way the Commonwealth is saying
That's
that
not
it
what they
did.
said, but go
Yeah,
ahead.
that's not what
Well,
they,
what they
they
did
took
say.
great,
Well,
they took
hold on. Let
great
me just
pains
finish.
that it
Let
wasn't
me,
the
here, Kate.
head
I'll
with
let
the vehicle.
Kate, I'll let you go back. Let me just finish what I'm saying. The only concession that I heard in the testimony, the only concession that I heard was that Dr. Rentschler said it's possible, because they're trying to think of any possibility, and that's what they were doing. They were trying to figure out how in the world is this possible for this damage to happen. That's why they had to create a cannon, because there's no other way that it made sense without throwing this drinking glass at the bumper for this damage to happen to the vehicle. There was no other way that it could have occurred. They went through the head, that couldn't have happened. They went through the arm, that couldn't have happened. So the only possible conceivable
They did not.
way that,
They didn't go through any of those
well,
things.
they did. Let me just finish off my sentence. So they did go through that. The only thing that Dr. Rentschler said is possible is if she nudged him, and nudging him, and then somehow he slipped and fell and banged his head. So if that's what you're left with as a theory, then you're in very bad shape. Because the entire Commonwealth's theory here is that she backed the car up at 24 miles per hour and smashed him. If now the theory is, no, she slowed down at the last second and just nudged him a drop, so now he can spin around and slam his head on the curb and then somehow end up 10 feet away from there, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So go ahead, Kate.
Sorry, I mean, but again, so they knew that the shoe and hat were there. They did not have Trooper Paul's report, which again, I am not disputing that he was a terrible witness, but he is the one that went out and surveyed this crime scene. So we talk about physics, that's probably pretty important information. They went to great lengths to establish that the gash on the back of his head, that's basal skull fracture, right, was not caused by the car. They also, again, like the theory here, as far as what we can see from the Commonwealth, and they did not do a great job in trial of really clearly explaining this, but it's starting to come more into focus now, especially with Hank Brennan, is that she clipped him, right? So, and, Dr. Rentschler was asked about this extensively, as far as, does it look different from a head on to a clip? Do you know which it is? No, he doesn't, right? So they're not alleging that she just nudged him. They're not alleging that she hit him full on, right? They are alleging that she clipped him. And I would say that she has corroborated that, because she's made several statements, both privately to the people that are running her propaganda campaign, as well as publicly in interviews, that she thought that she clipped him, right? So she's corroborating the Commonwealth's theory. I think that cannot be ignored, right? There's too much, again, the ARCA was given a limited scope. Look at this right here. Don't look outside of that. I don't think that's suspicious on them. Obviously, it would be inappropriate for them to try to reach outside of the scope that they were hired to do. But I think, again, the limited scope, the lack of information, the lack of clarity here doesn't necessarily weigh their testimony as much as I think people want it to.
Okay, Kevin, go ahead.
Sure. Just, one of the things, Martin, too, as you see this in trial law all the time, you're looking at one piece of evidence here, the ARCA stuff, and saying that's reasonable doubt. Okay, you get reasonable doubt on that. And if that was the only evidence, yes. But what if, for example, we had a video emerge that showed the accident? Now that ARCA stuff would still be there, but you would look at the better evidence. You'd say, we got video that shows the Lexus backing into John. Now, we don't have that video. We're not going to have that video. However, we do have a mountain of evidence, including the image that I sent you earlier, that shows, when they actually look at the vehicle data, that there were two triggered events in the whole lifetime of the car in the text string. The first one comes, it correlates with John's phone, because John, as they were driving there, they weren't sure how to get there. He typed in the address into Waze. So we know they're driving down a street, and in order to get on that street, she misses the turn. And so she has to do a 3-point turn. She does it a little bit angrily, and so she hits the gas enough that triggers the creation of an event. That's the first event. Then she comes and she takes the right-hand turn onto Fairview. Now, because we know what time she missed the turn and what time she took the right-hand turn, we know that the 3-point turn on Cedar Crest Road was around 12:24, give or take 4 or 5 seconds. 8 minutes and 4 seconds after that, we have the next triggered event when she's going in reverse at 24 miles an hour. And 4 seconds into that, we have what Trooper Paul described very well as the telltale signs of a pedestrian accident, where the steering wheel jolted and there's a slight decrease in the speed of the vehicle. And that happens to be...
But no decrease in the acceleration. I think that's
no
probably
decrease in the
important.
acceleration.
Right.
And just to finish that off, so if you count from that 12:24 to 8 minutes and 8 seconds after that, that's going to be around 12:32 and 10 seconds. Well, John's phone last moved at 12:32 and 16 seconds, just seconds after that. That's pretty much to me is as bulletproof as video, and that's worth way more than what the ARC that erases any doubt by the ARCA guys.
Okay, so I mean, just in terms of the timestamps, I don't believe the text stream data has timestamps. I think it was just based on key cycles, and
it does not. You have to correlate it with
right.
The data.
So
on,
I mean,
with it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think Jackson pointed out a few good points on cross-examination about the keystrokes because based on all the movement of the car afterwards, and the keystrokes don't actually work out with the time that the vehicle is going backwards. But this aside, I think that even if you can say that the vehicle was going backwards at some point in time, 24 miles per hour, even if you can say that, when there's the ARCA experts which say very clearly that physics and science do not align and do not support. What they did say was, well,
that's what Free Reed says. But
I'll tell you. I'll tell you what I saw, and you can tell me. You correct me. Dr. Renshaw saw you. He said these exact words: "You can't deny the physics and the science." And that's when Lally was trying to get him to say, well, maybe this, maybe that, and he was saying, look, he went through every single scenario where the car's backing up at 15 miles per hour. Forget about 24. He went through the scenario of it going back 24 miles per hour, whether it's a clip, Kate, or whether it's a direct hit or a hit in the head, hit in the arm, whatever it was. And he said that the physics and science do not support that this interaction happened the way the Commonwealth said it happens. So even if you can find me, I'm just lay out a limb. Even if you can find me that, and I'll agree with you, let's say that you can find that the car went backwards 24 miles per hour at some point of time, I would still find reasonable doubt because the ARCA experts went uncontradicted in saying that the science and the physics don't lie, and therefore these injuries and this damage to the vehicle didn't happen. Okay, go ahead. Correct me, Kevin. Tell me why.
There's no way that anybody, let's just say Michael Proctor and the other troopers are evil geniuses, right? Who are for some unknown reason trying to frame Karen. There is no way that they would have the level of expertise that they could recreate those two events that match up so perfectly to the events on John's phone. So the 3-point turn on Cedar Crest, and then the second event that comes when she goes high speed and reversed 8 minutes and 4 seconds later. And the way that correlates perfectly with the time that John's phone stops moving. There's no way that anybody could have recreated that. That's why it's bulletproof.
I'm not saying that they can recreate it or not. What I'm saying is that the ARC experts said that there is no scientific and physical way that this actually happened. So I can't. Well, tell me what they said.
They went to great lengths to say that the car did not cause the basal skull fracture, which nobody was suggesting happened. Finally, you get a little bit of leeway. Well, maybe she could have nudged him not knowing that he was there and pushed him back. There was a lot of force, okay? He had a significant head trauma, right? But it was not completely ruled out. And again, you're looking at that in a vacuum. First of all, I would really submit to you that it clearly was not that persuasive as reasonable doubt, because by the defense's own reporting here, 9 out of 12 people were ready to hold her criminally responsible in some way for killing John O'Keefe, right? So you can't get to that manslaughter OUI without conceding that she and she alone is culpable for his death. Now, I understand the issue with intent there. I've struggled with it too. I think that's a whole separate issue. But for people which, frankly, have a vested interest in continuing to push this, right? Saying, well, reasonable, it wasn't persuasive to the last jury. And I think that, it was a weak spot. In the Commonwealth's case, they didn't have their own biomechanical engineer, right? And again, I'll go back to, now they do. And I'll say if, but we know it's probably when, right? If that biomechanical engineer for the prosecution comes back and says, yes, it is consistent, does that convict her? Are we gonna look at that in a vacuum? Like we're looking at the ARCA in a vacuum here? Because I think that would be a huge disservice to the defendant, would it not?
So, Martin, did the ARCA guys consider the state's theory? That's one. You said they considered every possible thing, But did they consider? Do you know what the state's theory is? Maybe Kate will explain it to you. And did they consider that?
I mean, if you're just going by the trial, I understand why people would not understand what the state's theory is. Again, I think that only recently as it started to come into focus more, if we're being honest, right? Which again is a huge weak point in their case. I think that caused the mistrial more than anything else, more than the jury tampering, the witness intimidation, the relentless media campaign, the morally flexible YouTubers willing to hone in on the talking points. More than anything else, I think it was the weak spots in the prosecution's case, right? But I think at this point, again, we've at least figured out that the Commonwealth is, their theory is that she backed up at 24 miles an hour, clipped him, drove off, knew that she had hit him, and left him to die in the snow. And again, I mean, we have Karen Reed on camera now going, what I thought could have happened is maybe I could have clipped him. Could I have? I mean, it's uncanny, is it not, that the defendant's initial theory about what happened matches up to the Commonwealth so closely, right? I mean, is she a psychic?
And Kate's right that they didn't explain it very well, Martin, in the first trial, but we're getting a sense of it now from Brennan, and it's the same theory that people like me and Kate have been talking about since the trial, and that is that John put up his arm in kind of a defensive reaction at the last second, something like this. We don't know exactly what. We'll need a really good accident reconstruction to explain it, but that it's the elbow, the arm is bent, and the elbow is what broke the taillight, and it's just kind of a swipe. That's why there's not that much more damage. There is a dent on the front panel that is exactly a 4 arms length away from the taillight. So John's elbow snapped into it as the car was going through. Now, yes, that was not explained very well to the jury in the first trial. However, you said the ARCA guys considered every possibility. Well, that's the most likely one, and they didn't consider it.
Well, I would argue that they did consider it because they specifically said on the stand that they considered the head and they considered the arm being hit. And what Dr. Rentler,
they demonstrated like that with the arm held straight out.
Well, what Dr. Rentler said is when you have 1,000 pounds of force going on someone's arm, it doesn't matter whether it's bent or straight out. You're going to have 1,000 pounds of force on that arm. You're going to have, and this was at 15 miles per hour. So so once you go to 24. You're talking a lot more. So at 15 miles per hour, he said you'd expect a lot more damage to the vehicle and you'd expect significant amount of bruising to the arm. So he said it still doesn't matter how his arm was positioned. If the arm was hit by that car going 24 miles per hour, you wouldn't just find some superficial abrasions on the arm. That was Dr. Menschel's testimony. And I don't know if you have a different recollection of it, but I just rewatched it today because
the body was not X-rayed, so we don't know if there were fractures in the arm. My guess is there would be, but the body was not X-rayed.
I mean, the medical examiner said there wasn't.
Just by feel, but yeah. Right.
Okay,
I have to go back to my question though, right? Because again, I think that we probably all drew different things out of that testimony, right? As far as we're going to look at it more critically and go, they didn't have all the information. They made some concessions at some point. They, did a Mythbusters style glass cannon and, whatever it is. But again, we're looking at this in a vacuum. And I noticed that you just haven't answered this. If the Commonwealth produces their biomechanical engineer, right, to say that it is consistent, does that convict her?
Right. So I'll answer that question, but I really want to get back to it because it's really moving on to a new point. But I will answer that. The answer is that it really depends how convincing that biomechanical engineer is. If I was a prosecutor, if I was Hank Brennan, I had a really good biomechanical engineer, then I would tell the biomechanical engineer, look, this is what these ARCA experts are going to say. You're going to have to really explain to the jury why they're wrong. And don't just get up and say, yeah, I think it's consistent. You're going to have to completely obliterate the ARCA experts. So if I see that, I'm not going to be as convinced. But when you got these when you got the ARCA experts, and doesn't really matter to me so much what the jury said afterwards. If 9 of 12 wanted to convict her, I'm telling you what I see. What I saw was reasonable doubt from these ARCA experts, and we went through all the information or evidence that they did not have. That doesn't convince me at all. They definitely said they had enough information. They testified to that. There was nobody really contradicting them, except if you want to consider Trooper Paul, it wasn't even close to that. And any single scenario that the Commonwealth was trying to argue what happened, they said was not scientifically and sound. So to me, that's and even if we're going through these arguments, you're saying, yeah, what about this? What about that? You're right. Okay, fine. So the worst is that we don't know what to do. You're right. So you got the ARC experts on one side, and they say, well, maybe they're hired by the government, and maybe there's a conspiracy, and maybe there's some other evidence that they could have needed. At the end of the day, it's still left with reasonable doubt. And they didn't know that Karen Reed said I hit him. You're still left with reasonable doubt. I even said one time on my channel, I still think this is true. If Karen Reed would have called up John O'Keefe right after that time and said, I'm so happy that I just banged into you going 24 miles per hour backwards, and then you still have these ARC experts saying that's not what happened, that's not what science says happened, I would still think that's reasonable doubt, because science doesn't lie. So if there's no way to scientifically prove anything, and the Commonwealth doesn't have any sort of experts to say that it did happen, well, then you're left with reasonable doubt. I mean, I think that's just what reasonable doubt is. So I'm not saying
I just don't like this idea of science doesn't lie. There is no big oracle of Olympias that's called science with a capital S that came down and said the science shows us. That didn't happen. You had two ARCA guys, two experts who were qualified, who had an opinion. And one of the things that we see in life, it's human nature, is that people, once they have a side, they argue to the conclusion that they've already made. And this is why you have a battle of experts, right? In not just in this, but in fields of science and philosophy and physics and stuff like that. So these guys, it's clear they didn't look at not just all the evidence, but very critical evidence. They didn't consider all of the scenarios. They didn't have the scenario that we're looking at now, that John bent his elbow. We thought of this, and we're not accident reconstruction experts. They didn't even consider that, which tells me there's something fishy going on. They didn't want to find it. I'm okay with you saying that their opinions created doubt for you, but I just wish you would stop saying science shows, like old man would come in and came out and threw it down, and science says this did not happen, because that didn't happen. That wasn't in the trial.
Okay, like I said, they did consider the arm being hit. They did consider, and I explained
not like that. That's very different.
Yeah, but if you watch what they said again, you're not just logically. If there's 1,000 pounds of force, it doesn't matter whether your arm's like this or like this. There's going to be bruising. There's going to be fractures. There's going to be not just some pattern linear abrasions. That's what they testified to. So they didn't do this on the stand. But what they did say was, if that arm was out there and it's being hit with 1,000 pounds of force, you are going to find more bruising. You are, and that's just what the science is. Now, you try to come up with other ideas. But here's the other thing: you keep saying about this critical evidence. We went through all the evidence that they did not have, and I don't see how any of it is critical. The fact that you said I hit him,
that's like the body in the autopsy. I mean, the vehicle data is the most critical evidence. They knew it was there, and for some reason they didn't ask for it. And there was kind of a hint to them, the fact that they weren't sent that data.
Are you talking about the tech stream data?
Yeah,
the tech stream data. That's the only vehicle data they had, because there was no CDR.
And I would say that on their website, they have an entire blog about how important text stream data is. Yeah. So their company seems to understand that that's a pretty critical piece of information. So I would defer to them. I'm not a biomechanical engineer anywhere close. So I would definitely defer to ARCA, who is stating on their website that that's pretty important information.
In fact, it says in that very article that you can recover critical data from the text stream that wouldn't be available in a CDR or in situations where there was no CDR.
Now, sure. I mean, I'm not saying that text stream data is not important, generally speaking. It's the most
important data.
Well, I wouldn't say it's the most. I wouldn't say it's the most important data. And also, I would also make a mention that you guys are smarter than Lally, because Lally didn't bring up this idea that they were missing the text stream data. So
I wouldn't say that we're smarter than Lally. We are Monday morning quarterbacks that probably have a little bit of, the same with even lawyers commentating on this. I noticed that a lot of you respectfully aren't in this state. So we're all kind of, and your chat is probably full of people, either laymen or people that are not directly involved. Lally was under a lot more pressure than we were. Lally was dumped, a ton of discovery mere weeks before the trial, working on this alone. And I, as a layman, questioned his trial strategy. I think he gave the conspiracy way too much oxygen, right? And unfortunately put up some witnesses there that probably would have been served better were they crossed by the Commonwealth. Colin Albert comes to mind in particular, probably would have benefited from leading questions that weren't quite so hostile, right? As far as, did they get anything from Colin? No. But did it definitely intensify the harassment for him because of the social media? Absolutely. So, I mean, I question it, but I wouldn't say that we're smarter than Lally. I would just say that, unfortunately, Lally, I think, was fighting out of his weight class a little bit. This is not typical for Massachusetts, this Hollywood style.
I actually remember him discussing the text. He did discuss the text stream. I don't remember if it was in the voir dire or if it was in the trial, but he absolutely asked him about the text stream.
Well, he didn't do it
can't
in the trial.
answer, but they can't answer questions about information they don't have. So I think there was a technical reason. But no, I think it was in the voir dire maybe but he did ask him about that.
It may
just
have been.
said, were you sent this? Were you sent this data is what he asked him.
Yeah, he didn't ask it definitely in the real trial because I just rewatched it today. The experts. So the texting he didn't ask. Now again, I'm going to say that I don't know what the texting data would have shown them that would have been significant to this. Whether how fast the car was going. Like I said, they were able to run through that analysis without the texting data. So I don't know why this is so critical that they would have.
Well, it would have also showed the telltale signs of a pedestrian accident, pedestrian collision. At least that's what. I'm not an expert on that. That's what Trooper Paul claims, but that it shows at 4 seconds into that second event that there was the telltale signs.
Yeah, again, but again, it all comes back to the damage to the vehicle still doesn't equal this interaction, and the damages to the injuries to John O'Keefe do not equal this interaction. So
but they don't know what the interaction was. They don't know it was a swipe. They don't know. They're looking at this like in most accidents they see this kind of a full-on collision. And there wasn't here. This was a swipe, and I don't think that's very easy to come up with. I don't think science comes up with a very automatic, easy answer on that.
Well, like I'm saying, they did run through all the different possibilities that they said on the stand. So unless you're trying to create a new possibility that was never discussed during the trial, they said that they went through the different possibilities, and the only thing that they can think of was creating a cannon to throw this glass at the taillight. So they did go through all these possibilities.
I don't know that they went through all, because they also said that there were infinite possibilities that could have caused the basal skull fracture. So I don't think they went through infinite possibilities, again, according to the parameters. And I would go back and say it clearly wasn't persuasive reasonable doubt for the majority of the jury. It doesn't erase all the other evidence, right? And I think that, again, just like if the Commonwealth, that alone should not convict Karen Reed. If you get a biomechanical engineer to go, yep, even if they do a very good persuasive job, right? That just one expert's opinion, absent of any other circumstantial, physical, direct, evidence, testimony, all these things that tie together and create the Commonwealth's case in chief here, right? If we're looking at things just in a vacuum, they should not necessarily unilaterally convict or acquit, right? I mean, just because you've got the ARCA experts who, again, they were given a limited scope, they were missing information, right? They conceded that it was a possibility. For whatever reason, they made sure that their hypothetical with the vehicle was devoid of any intent, right? But they conceded that in some iteration it is a possibility. But that doesn't erase the physical evidence found at the scene, the statements that Karen Reed made, the statements that she continues to make, right? The testimony from everybody inside that house, independent testimony from 4 different first responders that all heard her say, "I hit him," right? Her interactions with the EMT in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. It doesn't erase all that. Her blood alcohol level, her Toyota tech stream data, right? Like, if you look at it all together, I don't think I don't understand. There's not a lot that supports that she is absolutely factually innocent. This is a miscarriage of justice. I mean, just based on the evidence in pretrial filings and hearings before we even get to trial, like, there was probable cause to charge her, was there not?
Yeah, I would say there's probable cause to charge her. Sure.
Okay, right.
I mean, so, but again, we don't have the burden is not to prove that she's innocent. The burden is on the Commonwealth to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she is a murderer. And once you hear those ARCA experts, I don't know how that doesn't create at least reasonable doubt. It's not such a high burden. It's just a reasonable doubt that maybe we're not getting the full picture here. Maybe there's something here that we don't understand. And once there's something here that we don't understand, that means we can't convict her. So that's what I saw. And when you say like that they didn't rule out all possibilities, the only possibility, we're going a little bit in circles, but the only possibility that they said was maybe she nudged him. And that would go in the infinite amount of different possibilities. He could have slipped on the ice and broke his head, smashed his head into the curb. It goes into the same pocket of infinite amount of possibilities. That's what he was saying in reference to. But in terms of the damage to the vehicle and the injuries to John O'Keefe, they just don't add up. So that's, to me, reasonable doubt. And I think Kevin actually acknowledged as much just before that. If you're looking for doubt, that's enough doubt. So did you say that, Kevin, or?
Yeah, no, I agree with some of what you just said there. The burden is definitely on the state to prove it. So if you have competing theories, and even if the state's theory is 50% stronger, that's not enough. But this is why you have to look at the totality of evidence. You're not just looking at one thing in isolation. And I do think it is a factor. So not that we should necessarily read everything into the fact that 9 jurors decided that she was guilty of manslaughter. And there doesn't seem to be, from the 2 other ones that were interviewed, including one of them that believed Karen was the one that voted not guilty. She didn't mention the ARCA guys. So I think what happens here, and you can speak to this much more than me, and I like that tie, by the way.
Thank you.
is that
I'll tell my wife. She picked it up.
Yeah, it's like silver or something like that, right? I like that. That's like a power tie. So these 9 jurors
making you feel uncomfortable.
These jurors, I think they understood that once the prosecution rests, now you're getting defense experts. And they don't dismiss that idea, but they have a healthy degree of skepticism. And they see a doctor come on who's, seemed like a wonderful, but was probably in his mid-80s. Then Dr. Russell comes on, again, very old, Rich Green, affable. Again, didn't seem like he was seeking all of the data either. Dr. Russell had no interest in the canine DNA, the lack of canine DNA. So jurors are people of the world, and they understand that defenses and potentially prosecutors are going to find experts like that to gravitate towards what they want to hear. I mean, what that side wants them to hear. And what they're going to do is look at the evidence that they consider to be irrefutable. And I think in this case here, they just really dismissed the ARCA stuff, and they looked at things like Karen's statements at the scene. If they had a better explanation by the state as to what happened, I think it would have been a slam dunk.
By the state, what happened, or by the defense? Oh, you're saying, you're saying if the state would have tightened up their theory. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yes, if the state had actually presented. So if even just for an example, I talked about that key data that has the correlation between John's phone data and the vehicle data. But that was presented by 2 different witnesses. Trooper Guarino had the phone data. He did not have the vehicle data. And Trooper Paul had the vehicle data, but did not have the phone data. And it's that correlation that really makes it key. And they didn't put that together by any witness, but by the time the prosecution ended, Lally put it together a little bit in the closing arguments, but that's too late. And even Lally, in the opening arguments, he said John was struck at 12:35, and in the closing arguments, he said 12:30. So it's not really surprising that the jury was confused.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't possible 12:35. Her phone connected to Wi-Fi at like 12:36, and it's at least a 5-6 minute drive. So, yeah, it seems like every time that there'd be another witness that would talk about some sort of incriminating evidence, there'd also be kind of some doubt thrown in there, because once you got the 12:36 her phone connecting to John's Wi-Fi, then you got all these other questions about who saw her at what time when, and now stories are starting to conflict with each other. So, okay. But before we move on, I guess let me just see if there's any. I just want to recognize some people here. So we have Elaine, Brother Counsel, please have Melanie Little, Mark Vetero, Turtle Boy on. You need to hear from both sides. Okay, actually, I am going on Turtle Boy's show Saturday night, so I'm going to all sides of this dispute. So I think we can have respectful conversations. I'm going to try. Everyone deserves a chance, right? I mean, everyone's saying you guys are terrible, and people are saying Turtle Boy is terrible. Let's try it. Let's try it.
Yeah.
I think it's been okay so far, hasn't it been?
Oh, yeah.
I like you. I like your approach, man.
No one's getting homicidal,
thanks,
so that's always a good one.
I'm not, I just talk about the evidence. That's all I do. And that, some people on the on the I don't know what you would call the the anti-free Karen Reed movement. I mean, they don't like me much either, even though like I'm just talking, like what I see from the evidence. That's all. Okay, so we have Meatball Morrissey, Scuddy Stain, and that person is one of Caitlin Albert's best friends. I can smell your stink from here. Okay, well, I'm just, if you're giving some money to the show, then we gotta show your comment. Thank you for becoming a member. We
understand.
Yeah, you got Glamour Slam. The Commonwealth has withheld exculpatory evidence. This is Brady material. The motion to dismiss is being filed. I just saw this motion come across today, by the way. I'm going to have to go through that motion, but like always, I always, present the motion, and then I want to see what the response is. So we'll see what that has to do. But I just did a quick reading of the motion today. You guys saw that motion already?
I did, and I'll tell you what stuck out to me right away. It's like, I would suspect that the onus, it would be on the defense, right, to communicate to Miss Crawford ahead of time what they're sending their expert out to do, right? And I think that had that happened, most likely Miss Crawford would have said, you can't do that. Don't bother. Don't waste the time and money. Right. And even if she didn't, she wouldn't be shocked and confused when the expert shows up and says, I'm here to do this extraction. So I think this is a purportedly $12,000 bill just to give the media something to gnaw on again. I mean, it's unreasonable to assume that 3 years after the fact that data is still going to be in the DVR. It's always 30 days. It was preserved because it was given over to the defense, right? It still exists, so it was preserved. But, they have to do something to keep the news cycles going. That's Alan Jackson's trial strategy. We saw it in the Spacey case. We saw it in the Weinstein case. Like, this is what he does. So,
well, I mean, I will say that from a quick read of that motion, and again, I have to go obviously do a much more of a deeper dive, and I do research also. I actually look up the cases and do some research on the law. But what's more interesting to me is they had it in a footnote in that motion that they're actually going to file a motion to dismiss the case based on a Brady violation. That's going to be more interesting to me than whether they get this $12,000 bill paid or not. I mean, I'm sure Karen Reed wants $12,000 to be reimbursed, but I think what she'd rather is for this case to be dismissed based on a Brady violation. Now, this really goes into the fact of when a prosecutor knows of exculpatory evidence, and that prosecutor has a duty to send that over to the defense or at least preserve that evidence. And we're going to see whether, and part of the argument that I just saw this quickly, but part of the argument that I saw was that when you have that video inside of the Sally port and you don't preserve that video when you know that that was the murder weapon, allegedly, you don't preserve that video, that itself can be a Brady violation. So again, I have to do the research on it. But I think that's going to be more of an interesting issue for me as opposed to who's going to pay this $12,000 bill. I'm
maybe fourth time is the charm. Fifth time's the charm. How many motions to dismiss on extraordinary governmental misconduct and Brady violations? It's at least 4, it may be 5, but good luck to them. I think that anyone who can be intellectually honest can look at some of these pretrial moves and recognize that they are performative and that historically anyway, they are largely unsuccessful inside the courtroom. Very successful outside of the courtroom. Your chat proves that, but as far as inside the courtroom, not so much. And I know that there's the choir screams that Judge Canone is a terrible judge and she's biased and she's corrupt, but there's absolutely no evidence to support that whatsoever, right?
Well,
This
may surprise you, Kate, but I've actually said on my channel that I haven't really seen bias from Judge Canone. I've said this a number of times, and in fact, I saw some rulings that really she could have ruled in favor of the Commonwealth. For example, in last trial, she could have very legally precluded Dr. Russell from testifying at all. It was a Rule 14 violation. She's coming in at the last minute. She could have not let her, and I was actually surprised that she let her testify. And then there were some other rulings also, and that I point out that I say, look, I just don't see bias. I don't really love the way that she runs the courtroom. I don't love the way that she allows the attorneys to conduct cross-examination. I think it should be much more wide open, much more liberal with the way that cross-examination is done. But I know that this is where the free Karen Raiders don't like me when I say that I haven't seen blatant bias by Judge Canone. But let me move on to just maybe some other, now that we're past the ARCA experts. And again, I'm going to tell you, I have not embraced, and I've told you this both, I guess, on Twitter and other places, I have not embraced this conspiracy theory. Okay. And I think there's, some argument, and definitely if there's proof, you have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Definitely don't see that. But this is where what gets people interested, and I want to take your thoughts about this. So number one, you've got the house that was never searched, right? And you just spoke about probable cause before. Is there probable cause to arrest Karen Reed? And I say, yeah, sure. There's probable cause. She was driving the car. They were in a fight. Yeah, definitely. There's probable cause. Is there not probable cause to search that house?
I mean,
Okay.
No, I've spoken to many detectives about this, right? It's writing the warrant, getting it before a judge is a time-consuming process, and every detective that I've talked to unilaterally, some of whom were close friends with John O'Keefe, so certainly, they have high standards for what they would want, done. They acknowledge there's no probable cause there, just the presence of somebody on the property line at that, but in front of the house. That you have to be able to connect that victim to that home somehow, right? And you've got 11 people, and they did question them all, right? So it's not like they weren't investigating this, but you've got 11 people saying, no, he never went in the house, right? At some point, they at least went into the house to speak to the homeowners and presumably looked around, right? Didn't see anything in a state of disarray, no signs of a struggle. I mean, do you want the government to be able to, just on, a hunch or, an inkling or, something a little bit suspicious, be able to invade your home? I don't think that we want that, right? So I think that, probable cause is low, but it's not that low.
So
I mean,
the
Kate,
Canton
go ahead,
police
Kevin.
officer, Canton police officer Sergeant Lank was already in the house when the homeowners had been woken up by Jen McCabe, who went in, and so he was there to witness them coming down the stairs. And he described Brian as looking like he just woke up, particularly, after he'd had a long day of traveling from New York the day before, and obviously drinking. So he's taking in information there. And then he's talking to the homeowners and to Jen McCabe, and then Matt when he got there, and then Brian Higgins, who had been in the house before, and also presumably Brian Jr., it was his party, and he lives there too. And he's making a determination here that there's nothing suspicious. There's no basis for me. Now, is there a little bit of that police thing where you're not going to ask this guy for permission to search his house because he's a fellow cop and his brother works for your police department? That stuff is normal. That goes on. But in hindsight, there was no basis for searching that house.
I was going to say, we have the benefit of hindsight now. So we know from his phone data, right? There is absolutely nothing, not even, and Karen Reed didn't testify, right? So I know I do tend to go outside of the scope, because the conspiracy is where I really have an issue. If Karen Reed had simply had a defense that just wanted to cast reasonable doubt by the way of experts or criticizing the investigation, fine, right? Like, I think that she is factually guilty. I think that there is more than enough evidence to support that. But that's how our criminal justice system works. Better that one guilty person go free than one innocent person get locked up, right? I think we can all agree on that. However, that is not what she decided to do. And she decided to literally reassign blame anywhere she could to innocent people, right? I mean, talk about probable cause. There's no probable cause to even charge these people with any crimes, let alone convict them of anything. But they're being convicted on social media, and there are real world ramifications that they are feeling, right? That is not how our justice system is supposed to work. They don't even get the presumption of innocence because they don't even have criminal charges. So I mean, it's not even consideration here, and it's awful. But I mean, we do have the benefit of looking back now, and nothing puts that in the house, not even Karen Reed herself, right? Because again, she's making these public statements, and she always stops short at saying, yes, I saw him actually physically enter the house. She changes her story a little bit. She pushes him further. Well, he went up the driveway. I saw him open the door, and I saw him stick his head in, but she always stops short at placing him in that house, and nothing else places him even close to that house. His phone GPS, witness testimony, the place where his personal affects were found, his phone, his hat, his shoes, right? Nothing places him in that house. So retroactively, I think we know for sure that there was definitely no probable cause to search that house. But even if you look at it through the lens of like what they're observing that day, what's the link? What's the connection here?
So I mean,
the GPS shows, Martin, that the phone didn't go in the house. Okay, at the very least, the phone didn't go in the house, and the phone was found underneath John's body at the far edge of the property. So it's really, really difficult to imagine how John goes in the house, gets beat up. unconscious and is now deposited on top of his phone at the far edge of the property.
Okay, so just coming back to kind of the point here, the reason why I have issue with that is that he was invited to the house. It's not just that, you know, some guy ends up dead on your lawn and like, oh my gosh, this is a surprise. What's he doing here? This is someone who you literally invited to your house. And 20 minutes later, he's dead on your front lawn. And that's not probable cause to see what's going on in that house, to search that house. It's just, and then the next day is when Proctor sends a text to somebody saying, oh yeah, don't worry, he's not going to catch anything. He's a Boston cop.
Well, that's
right away.
That's not only what he said, though, right?
Well,
Like,
I mean, that was
you're
one of the-
removing context, because he said all signs, right, point to he didn't do anything, right? So, you know, again, that's disingenuous when people do that. You're taking cherry picking little bits of information here. I mean, you can invite someone to your home and they can die for a variety of reasons before reaching your home. Just the fact that they are invited to your house and end up deceased, again, on the property line, the far end of your yard, I don't think in and of itself constitutes probable cause. And you know, I am again judging this based on the detectives that I've spoken that have all unilaterally said, yeah, I wouldn't even bother trying to write that warrant. And you know, I think that that's a good thing because again, probable cause is low, but I think we both know it's not that low.
Well, I mean, I think that you have a point if he wasn't invited to the house. I think you may have an argument, but I think the fact that he was invited to the house by one of the people in the house, I think that's really where people start saying, you know, if he wasn't a Boston cop, that house would have been searched. So it's
I don't think that's accurate. I mean, they clearly asked people, right? So they investigated it. But again, you know, you're going to write on the warrant, he was invited, but 11 people say that he never went in the house. I mean, come on. You have to have something that links him to the house. Something.
And is that a sign of
there.
corruption? Is that a sign of corruption, Martin, where they're planting evidence, or is that just a sign of there's a little bit of reluctance on the part of police to investigate their own? I want to tell you something interesting here. So the troopers arrived at the Canton Police Station, the troopers that ran the investigation at 9:30 a.m., and they're going to speak to the Canton police who were at the scene and get the first overview of what's going on. From there, they go to the McCabe's home. And they talked to Matt and Jen, who were key witnesses. Jen is probably the most important witness from various locations. And Brian Albert met them there. So they talked to all three of them separately. They leave there, I'm not sure what time, but say around 11:30. Now, if there was ever a time when a conspiracy was hatched and plotted out, it was there, because you had Brian Albert and the McCabe's right there with the troopers, okay? And the only way that Karen is innocent is if those taillight pieces were planted at the crime scene. That's the only way. There's no middle ground here, okay? So when they leave the McCabe's house, Karen's Lexus is sitting only a mile away in John's driveway. Do they go there? Do they take it into custody? No. If they certainly were, if they were involved in planting evidence, if they had just hatched this scheme and they had just got their orders to do that. No, they go to the hospital to look at the body, and they think Karen's there.
And again, I think, like I said in the beginning, the only way that you can argue for the conspiracy is if you have all of the pieces working together. It's not just one, like Kate was saying, you can't just look at one piece in a vacuum. You know, if you want to hash this argument about a conspiracy, it's got to be a lot of things together. And like I said, I'm not sold on the conspiracy in the slightest, but I do find some issues here. So for example, the fact that the house wasn't searched, that smells to me like that's preferential treatment. The fact that everybody who left that house that night didn't see John O'Keefe on the ground. I think I struggle with that. You know,
and I'm talking about there's science for that. There's science for that, right? It is pretty well
Capital
established.
S science.
Right. The science doesn't lie, right? You can look it up. It's called the monkey business illusion. And I think something like 90% of people that view it and aren't told ahead of time what they're viewing fall for it, right? Your brain focuses on what it focuses on. So even in a well-lit room with you know, all your wits about you, completely stone cold sober, if you're focusing on one thing here and something happens back in the background or the peripherals, right, your brain doesn't always register it. So they're not looking for a body. Everybody is admittedly drinking, right? They're focused on the road or their conversations. They're not looking for, and we have Juliana Nagel, who, if she is to be believed, at least saw something and said, that's a little weird, and thought nothing of it, because of course they're not looking for a body. So I don't find that to be strange at all. I could probably go outside your house, Martin, and I could probably lay down in a dark area, and you could take your kids to school in the morning you're probably not going to notice me. You're not, because you're not looking for me, right?
If she's not moving. So this is the thing, Martin. If
Right.
you, let's say you get in your car now and drive to the grocery store, and it's a 3-mile drive or something, and you're going through the neighborhoods, your peripheral vision, so your unconscious mind, is detecting thousands and thousands of objects in every yard, right? But only a tiny, tiny fraction of that is flagged to your conscious mind. And an object that is unmoving on a lawn is not going to be flagged to your conscious mind. And just to add to that, Lucky the plow driver testified that he plowed at 5:30. He also testified that he plowed at 2:30, couple passes at 3:30, and a couple passes at 5:30. He didn't see an object there. He didn't see John there on any of those passes. So that includes at 5:30, and John was just found, a half hour later. So that kind of just proves that if you're not looking into the yard, if something's unmoving, it's not going to grab your attention.
And again, like we're ostensibly convicting people based on what they didn't see or they didn't do. I mean, I'm your client, Martin, and I come in and I say, oh my God, I was just arrested last night. Why? Well, for conspiracy to commit a murder. Well, what's the evidence they have? Well, I didn't see the body on the front lawn and I made a couple butt dials. I mean, that's absurd. And again, these people are being judge, jury, and execution pretty much by social media right now every single day. And it is absolutely appalling behavior. And that's really where I personally take issue with this. This is what, to me, sets this case apart from what otherwise would be probably a pretty boring, drunk driving hit and run, right? Is this form of a defense strategy, working in tandem with, again, some questionable YouTubers. I have no problem in saying that. I know you did a video explaining why you're not a grifter, so I'm not going to lump you into that. Thank you for doing that, right? Nobody asked, but yeah. But I mean, Katie,
as long as it made you laugh. I mean, as long as it made you laugh, that was the point.
No, it's the only one that gets sent around. That's why I bring it up again. But to me, anyway. But yeah, I mean, it's questionable, right? And I think that this is, absolutely a miscarriage of justice, particularly when we look through the lens of, at the very least, if you're being honest, if and you being anyone, there was probable cause to arrest her, right? So I mean, all this extra stuff that goes on afterwards, and free this woman, and she's pure as the driven snow, and these other people that are by all accounts just innocent witnesses, maybe a couple things that you're scratching your head over, but nothing substantial, right? I mean, you wouldn't want your client arrested over what they're claiming is evidence.
Again, like I said, I don't think, and I'll say it again, like I'm not sold on this conspiracy at all. What I'm saying is these are the points which I haven't heard great answers to. The fact that the house wasn't searched, I think that's a big question. I think he was absolutely getting preferential treatment. Number two, the fact that nobody saw, one person passes by, they don't see, two people. Every single person that passed that house, and they're passing right by that lawn, and there's a 6'2" guy there, and it hasn't snowed a ton where it can be covering him. It's just one of these things where I think that's what's bothering people about this. And when you get to the butt dials, that happens at 2:00 in the morning, and and then Brian Albert's story is that he's in the middle of an intimate moment with his wife when there's, I mean, how many times. I shouldn't ask you, but I can't imagine that people during intimate moments butt dial people. Like, first of all, I don't know what your phone's
entirely
doing
possible.
I mean,
it is though. I mean, it happens.
And then, I mean, anything a butt dial, I guess, at any time is possible. And then you're talking about a butt dial between both Brian Higgins and Brian Albert at the same exact time, where they're both butt dialing and not remembering and not having any conversation. That's where people start saying, there's more going on here. Which why I did a video saying, these are all the coincidences that if you want to argue the conspiracy, this is what you would argue. Not that I'm agreeing with this conspiracy, but these are a bunch of coincidences, bunch of really things that don't have great explanations. Everyone, Brian Higgins destroying his phone in a military base.
I can explain that too. I mean, all these things have explanations, but people on that side don't want them.
Right.
And kind of just to bring back like this thing, with Michelle Tracona's trial. I don't know if you guys watched it, but that was a trial that I followed. You didn't see it, Kevin?
No.
Oh, okay. No. Oh, okay, fine. So it's worthless what I'm talking about. But that was a story where it's like each individual thing, maybe you can try to explain away, but the prosecution just put it all together and saying, look, each one maybe you could explain away, but all these things together, that's where the things start to smell.
I
if
would
you want,
say that's the prosecution's case against Karen Reed, though. I mean, and I think that kind of harkens back to the point that both Kevin and I were making at the onset of this conversation, right? Which is that you can't look at things in a vacuum here. If you look at the totality of the evidence, and again, I am not an attorney. I'm not a particularly bright woman. I'm solidly average intelligence here. But
don't put yourself down, Kate.
but no, I mean, but it's true, right? It's just fact. But I have certainly had some interactions with the criminal justice system. If I put myself into Karen's shoes and I look at the mountain of evidence that she's contending with here, right? I'm not feeling good about my own case. I'm just not, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that, again, so you explain away, well, ARCA says, in their opinion, this doesn't match up, right? Okay, that's, again, one company, couple of experts, great. But then we've got all the physical evidence, and again, her own statements, the witness testimony, the forensic evidence, and it just builds and builds and builds. And I mean, it's not great. I mean, I don't think necessarily, and 9 out of 12 jurors would agree, apparently, that the questions here, or the things that people scratch their head and go, well, that's a little funny. It wasn't enough to absolve her, right? It wasn't enough to point anywhere else. I mean, it's butt dials, right? What's the 22-second calls in some cases? What do you think they're doing in 22 seconds, right? Like, what are they doing?
See, Martin, one of the things too is I think you understand, every defense theory starts with looking for odd things, or things trying to find elements that you could present as odd, even though most of these things do ultimately have perfectly mundane explanations. So for instance, in this case, and we in the public are ignorant, so we don't know, but we have to be patient and wait for the explanation, right? And realize that we don't know. So for example, in the early hearings, Alan Jackson was grandstanding. Karen Reed went home between 12:35 and 12:37. And why was she not on this library surveillance video? There's a gap in the library video. And everybody's like, wow. Oh my, even me too. When I was like, wow, how could that happen? What is this, like the Nixon Watergate tapes? What's going on here? But it turns out the cameras are motion triggered. And there were several different ways that Karen could go home. And she obviously didn't go by the library at that time. Same thing a few months later. The hair that was found on the rear panel was the testing is destructive on it, and they took a small piece and gave it to the defense, and they tested it at a lab, and the lab reported that no human DNA was found. And Alan Jackson trumpeted in the hearing, non-human DNA. That's not the same thing.
Hair, right.
Non-human hair. I'm sorry. Yeah, non-human hair. I'm sorry. Yes, non-human hair. In other words, like maybe this is not like some kind of a synthetic hair. That wasn't the case at all. The hair was later matched to John. But this fools people. And 90% of these things do have simple explanations, whether it's the military base thing or anything, if you go through it carefully. But in every case, there are going to be a percentage of odd things that aren't explained. And I would put the butt dials in that. And maybe I'm a little older than you, but for people from my generation, there used to be a different kind of flip phone that you would accidentally call somebody, your wife, your girlfriend, whatever, just sitting in your car. And we would call that a butt dial. And so people that are Brian Higgins and Brian Albert's age, they call any accidental call a butt dial. So I do these accident, and I do too. I call it butt dials. And I haven't done a real butt dial probably in 15 years, but I do something that I call a butt dial probably 5 times a week.
Yeah, but I mean, to have a butt dial and a butt answer is pretty fantastic. So I think that's
well, I mean, you're also dealing with drunk people's recollections,
Yes. Yeah.
After the fact. So again, what does it prove? What does it really prove? These butt dials, right? That people that otherwise would be in communication were with each other that night, had communication. And again, I believe that they're inadvertent calls, right? So I'm not making any accusations that they're not. I have not been given anything that really would discount that, particularly if you look at the duration of these inadvertent calls. But let's say that they're not. What does that prove?
No, so what it does to me is that and this is what I've told my channel a bunch of times, is that what it does to me, not necessarily that it proves a conspiracy, but you know what it does prove, or what it does show? It does show reasonable doubt. And it shows that I think people
odd things do not listen.
Oh my God.
odd things can add up to reasonable doubt,
So-
but only if there is not only if there is insufficient evidence on the other side.
So
If
let me
there's enough
continue.
evidence that they're just odd things.
So let me continue. No, so let me continue with the thing. So why the reason why, and this is I think how I would approach it if I was Alan Jackson. I wouldn't seek my teeth into the conspiracy. What I would show is that, ladies and gentlemen, you're not getting the full story. There are people here that are not being honest. Okay, there are phone calls that were being made, and who knows what those phone calls were about. But I can tell you one thing: we don't have the full story. If you don't have the full story, guess what? That's reasonable doubt. So that's.
Do you think it's possible there's something embarrassing on that on somebody's text or on a call that they don't want to share? Isn't that the more normal explanation?
I mean, can we just back up and?
You can argue that it's embarrassing, but what's worse is to put someone away that for a crime they didn't commit. So
they were irrelevant. They were completely irrelevant.
I don't. You can't say it's irrelevant unless you know what that conversation was. So if
we know that it had nothing to do with killing John, because we know that John never went in the house.
You're going to have to establish that a conversation happened, which I don't think that they didn't do, right? You can plant seeds of doubt, but I mean, at the end of the day, Higgins and Brian Albert's stories were consistent. And what was also brought out during testimony is they didn't talk, right? So Higgins disappeared, right? He lawyered up, which, I don't like when people make inferences about that, honestly. Because if you find yourself embroiled in a legal situation, I think getting legal counsel is always the best idea. I have seen what happens when you don't have it in a variety of scenarios. Not always.
And by the way, just so you should know, I would always get counsel. I don't care if I was as innocent as the fallen snow. The second that anybody dies within a 20-mile radius of me, I'm getting counsel, and I'm not talking to the police without counsel. So that's
and never give over your phone.
Well, we've learned that now, and trust me, I'm sure. John McCabe feels that.
I've seen plenty of things. I've seen plenty of things, and I know innocent people that are sitting. I've seen plenty of things, and therefore I have no problem at all with anybody lawyering up at any point.
I only say that because I know that a negative inference in the free Karen Reed world especially is drawn from that. But my point being is, consistently, they both testified. Brian Higgins just went away. He ghosted everybody. He didn't speak to any of them. So their stories around things like these butt dials are consistent, where they admittedly haven't had any contact to, get their story straight or anything like that. So I don't see where they even established that there was a conversation. And
well, the place where you'd establish it is that the fact that there was a phone call made, phone call answered, and something happened for 22 seconds. Now, either that's a butt dial and a butt answer, or there's a conversation. And what I would tell the jury... What
was also established through testimony, though, is if the phone goes to voicemail, then it's going to show up as answer.
It was established.
Yeah, that was established.
Right. I'm not sure if that was established. But I think that would be definitely one of the arguments here, is that, you can tell the jury. It's just that, maybe it was a butt dial, maybe it was a butt answer, maybe it went to voicemail, maybe all these things, or maybe it was a phone, maybe it was actually a phone call that happened after this incident. And I don't know what happened in that phone call. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe it wasn't, maybe no blazing guns. But I don't know. I don't know what they said. And
the way it was established about the voicemail, this is the problem with a trial is you can't just get up there and make an argument. You have to get an expert. And the state wasn't going to bring in an expert from the phone company just to explain this, but they established it through other witnesses that when you call somebody and it goes to voicemail, on your end, the call will show as answered, but on their records, it will show as unanswered. And they established this through multiple witnesses in the trial.
Yeah, but I don't think that they established this. I don't think they established this specific phone call that this 22 seconds was to voicemail.
Well,
and
I mean,
Brian Higgins, I think
you can't.
And Brian Higgins,
right.
And Brian Higgins at one point said that he did call. So I mean, I think in the grand jury proceedings or something. So I mean, it's just again, I'm not using this as an argument to say, oh, there's definitely conspiracy. This is the smoking gun. What I would say is that this is a question which it's hard for me to swallow that two people bought out itself, and therefore it just raises another question in my mind. What do I not know? Not that they were figuring out the whole conspiracy, but something I don't know. And if I don't know it,
I'm sorry. You don't have a problem swallowing why somebody would show up to the scene screaming, "Did I hit him? Could I have hit him? Oh my God, I hit him." That to me is pretty hard to swallow, right?
So if someone's hysterical and they were with someone last night and they were drunk, and then the next morning they wake up and the guy's dead or not around, and you can think, hey, I was driving drunk, and I dropped him off, who knows, maybe I did hit him, and then you convince yourself and in your hysterical state that you did hit him, and then you start telling people you hit him. I can definitely hear that. It definitely resonates with me. It's not unreasonable. So I think the fact that the first, and I think it just brings a little bit.
But this is
home
before the
point a little
body
bit
is
more.
found, even, that she's saying this, right? The niece
Oh,
testifies that, yes.
She was saying that, did I hit him? Could I hit him? You know, so yeah,
I hit him. He got hit by a snowplow. He's dead. 5 o'clock in the morning. Again, she must be psychic, right? With the way that she's able to not only predict that John will be found dead, but the roundabout manner of death, at least what the Commonwealth's going to say, right?
Kate, if I wasn't home at the time that I told my mother I'd be home, and it was 5 minutes later, she would be calling the morgue already. She'd be calling the hospital. She would know that something terrible happened to me. Some people,
but Karen didn't do that. She didn't call the hospital. She didn't call the police, right?
No, well, again, the point is that the next morning when she wakes up and she sees that John's not there or whatever happened, then she starts going to her hysterical state of saying, what in the world
why would she say John's dead? I mean, it's 5 a.m.
And not only that, but
if she thinks he's drinking at an after hours party, wouldn't he either still be up drinking? It's only a few hours later, or would he have crashed on the couch there? Why would her mind ever go to John's dead? Why would it ever go to he's been hit by a plow?
Particularly when when the voicemails that she leaves go to you're sleeping with somebody else. Particularly when just a few weeks prior they had a similar incident in Aruba where, you know, again, her version of events that she's told the media, he, you know, is out of the room, doesn't return until 3 o'clock in the morning. She didn't think he was dead then, right? You know, she's calling him going, you're sleeping with somebody else. And then suddenly it shifts to, you know, he's dead. Not just that he's dead, but how he died. He got hit by a snowplow. Could I have hit him? Oh my God, I hit him. Like, there is no reason to believe this. And again, like you said yourself, your mother would be calling the hospitals. Your mother would be calling the police. You don't immediately just resign yourself to like, this person is dead because they haven't come home. That's ludicrous, right? You might have the worry, but a normal, I think, not guilty, like innocent, rational person is going to go, let's go ahead and check all the bases here. I'm going to call the hospitals. I'm going to call, you know, people that we were with last night. I'm going exactly what Carrie Roberts did, right? But that's not what Karen did.
Yeah, well, the point is that when you're the wife, or in this point in this story, the long-term girlfriend, and
2 years is not long-term.
Okay, I don't know how you define long-term, but to me that's
in your 40s. Come on,
that's a long time.
I don't know. I don't know. You know that we're gonna have
God
to leave
help
that up
you.
to the crowd. But to me, this is someone who you're very, very connected with, and I can understand why someone would get hysterical and think the worst and start acting hysterically. This is not someone who's thinking reasonably and rationally at 5 o'clock in the morning.
This is beyond just hysterical, though. This is literally like predictions here. Yeah.
Okay, let me just finish the thought. So yeah, you can be thinking, if you actually believe that she was hysterical, and by all accounts she was hysterical. By all accounts, she was absolutely screaming her head off. Every single person who testified said that she was absolutely acting hysterical. She's going to wake up the whole neighborhood, right? That was the testimony that was clear. Every single person. So either she's the greatest actress in the world, or she was actually hysterical. So again, I don't know if that actually bends more towards the favor that Karen Reed is guilty, or if she is just, the Julia Roberts stand aside because we've got Karen Reed now to take over all this acting. So that's just, I think, again, I understand your point that, she admitted that she hit him. And by the way, if I was a prosecutor, if I was Adam Lally, I definitely would have started off. And I was thinking about doing a little mock closing for the prosecutor, but I definitely would have started off almost exactly the same way that he did. That we have an admission by the defendant in this case. And I definitely would have argued that. But as a defense, your argument would be back that this is a lady who's, by all accounts, was hysterical. She was absolutely beside herself and thinking the worst, and therefore blurting out things, saying things that make no sense, and then saying, yeah, I must have hit him. And they could have probably hired some sort of psychologist to come in with some sort of expertise and say that, yeah, when someone is completely beside themselves and they think the worst, then they end up blaming themselves, and they end up saying that they did it. So
that's a pretty paper thin. I mean, and not just that, but again, hysterics cuts both ways, because what it looks like to me, and I'll say this is part of what takes me away from the murder too, as far as the intent goes, right? Is that hysterics look a lot like remorse, particularly with the statements that she's making. Oh my God, I hit him. This is all my fault, right? Who's going to look after the kids? That reads to me like remorse. I think where it gets sticky for her is if you read the statute, you really need to just intend to do the act that most people would understand has, carries a substantial likelihood of bodily injury or harm, right? That being the backing up at 24 mile an hour when the guy's behind your car. But regardless, I don't think that the hysterics necessarily, again, I think that's a much more paper thin excuse to essentially admitting to this than saying I was butt dialing someone. That at least is reasonable. And there's not really you can't really get anything substantial underneath that as to why they would be lying. You can speculate, right? But speculation is not for the courtroom. Maybe if you're trying to create doubt, but we need to be intellectually honest here, right? Speculation is not evidence. But I mean, Karen has a demonstrative and very concrete reason to walk back those statements and lie about them, does she not, right?
Yeah, I mean, but if your only evidence of someone's confession is in a hysterical state, it's just not the greatest evidence. I understand you. Oh yeah, it's admissible, but you can argue it. But like I said, if that's what you're hanging your head on, it's not going to be great.
It's not what any I've people on so-called this side. I've always kind of agreed with you on this, Martin, that I don't really want to focus on her statements at the scene or any witness statements for the most part, with some exceptions, because they're open to it. There's no recording of what she said, so we don't know what was in her head. We don't know for sure what she exactly said. We don't know if people unintentionally influence each other about what they heard later on. So I have always preferred to focus on logic and physical evidence and the timelines and things like that. So for instance, for me, when I spent months on this case in the summer of 2023 trying to figure out possibilities and what happened here, the key thing was to try to figure out where that Lexus was during every hour during that day and who had access to it and whether there was a chance that somebody could have pried pieces off it and planted it. In this case, would have had to be buried in 22 inches of snow. Well, really 3 feet, because the snow was on top of a plow bank. So that was what I focused on. And once I realized where the Lexus was and how incredibly unlikely it was, and that's without even getting to the multiple videos and photos that really show that it was already missing pieces by the time Karen left the house at 5:08. But just looking at where the Lexus was, and we know that those taillight pieces were reassembled and they matched Karen's Lexus. We know John's sneaker was there, the cocktail glass, the drinking straw from the cocktail glass. All of that stuff was there. This is not the situation where the police had tunnel vision. Either they framed Karen or she did it. And when you look at where the Lexus was and all the other possibilities, the idea that they even could have framed her is really impossible. And once you know that, then you know that butt dials are just butt dials. They don't matter anymore.
Well, I mean, the entire theory that it doesn't matter. I mean, I know we say seasoned investigator with, Brian Albert, but even normal people, no one is going, let's take this assault and turn it into a homicide. That's patently absurd, right? The entire theory is absurd.
And I will say that, Carrie Roberts did say that there was only a little bit of a crack in her taillight that she saw. And then also the other
wrong.
That is not true. Dude. And listen, I know Carrie Roberts personally. I've listened to her testimony. I've heard her story a million times. There
Adam
was
Lally
metal
showed
hanging out. Right.
Yes, and Adam Lally showed her the picture from the Sally port of the taillight of the way we've seen it, and she said, yes, that's what I saw.
She said there was metal hanging out, and she was worried someone was going to catch their jacket on it.
She also said, and then there was also testimony that, from others that it wasn't as when we saw with that whole side off, so there's
that's not. It's semantics.
That other cop that showed
cracked
up
versus broken. It's semantics.
So yeah,
that's
crack, and then all of a sudden a crack.
75% of the taillight was intact and undamaged. Right. Yeah. If you look at it from behind, it's undamaged. It's just you really have to look at it from the corner. But Carrie Roberts' testimony was clear, and we may even hear some of Karen's own testimony on that. That was recorded because
not testimony, but statements. Because you got to, I think that as an attorney, you can at least agree on that, right? Her insistence upon talking to the media ad nauseum is just stupid. It's a stupid thing to do, is it not?
I wouldn't be suggesting it. I don't, you can only control your client so much. But you don't want your client to be saying anything that's unnecessary. And now all those statements are going to be coming in at the second trial. Everything that she said to Gretchen Voss, everything that she's all the off the record statements are going to come in. So that,
well,
I mean,
that's not necessarily right now. Canoni is she is reviewing them in camera, and she's going to make a ruling as to whether or not those are coming in or
I
not.
haven't.
So
Okay,
nobody.
I mean, I haven't seen that. I mean, I know that she's allowing the discovery of all those statements.
Yep. So
We
that
can't
was
see them.
submitted in camera. And she's got it right now, and she's going to be I'm assuming going over it. She probably already has, and making a ruling as to whether or not they're admissible. And of course, like I would expect pushback from Gretchen Voss and Boston Magazine.
Well,
as
there
it
was
should be.
pushback. They're out of the picture.
I mean, continued pushback.
Yeah, I mean, there will be, but she made her
Yeah.
ruling, and now it's just a question of, I think, whether it's going to be admissible or not.
Right.
So again, I think, coming back to Dr. Marie Russell, because we kind of spoke about it a few times in other contexts. But Kevin, I think you had something to say about Dr. Marie Russell. The fact that she's seen so many wounds like that, and she's saying that it's a dog bite and not a car accident. And there's been no ER doctor or anybody else who's really contradicted her about that. What do you say about that?
I think we should probably start from the point of view that we're recognizing that there probably is no expert that has dealt with a situation similar to this, where most of the time with a dog attack, the victim survives and explains what happened, right? Or if the victim dies, there's no question that he was mauled to death by a dog. Here, your Dr. Russell is looking at superficial, shallow abrasions on an arm. She's only looking at photos and initially making this assessment by looking at a newspaper article. Now, she has since added some methodology that she didn't have during the trial, and she interestingly does talk about the fibers on John's shirt coming out and stuff like that. But it's clear here's someone that was arguing to a conclusion and is trying to help the defense team. So, I mean, there's just, they don't really look to me. I'm not an expert on dog bites, right? But when she can't explain, there's kind of 3 primary wounds on there, and they each look different from the other, and the spacing between the lines is different in each one. How could that? And she can't explain whether they're nails or teeth. It just didn't seem like a very qualified explanation on my part or convincing. She was arguing to a conclusion, very much like the ARCA guys.
Well, I think more so. I mean, demonstratively with her though, because she was not given a very narrow scope by the federal government, right? So I mean, she is purposefully ignoring this information. I don't know how you get over the lack of canine DNA. I don't. Again, like even in her memorandum in order, Judge Canone says this was a tough call. Like this was a close call, right? Because her expertise really is more in treating the wounds, not necessarily diagnosing and identifying them. And I think that I understand. I knew from the onset, right? Again, layman, not attorney, but it was abundantly clear that Marie Russell was going to be allowed to testify. She was allowed, despite the Rule 14 violation the first time. She is a medical doctor. She checks the boxes. She's qualified. Most of what Hank Brennan was crossing her on goes to the weight of her testimony, and I think he exposed a lot of really glaring vulnerabilities with her. But now he's locked her into the testimony, and God help her if she changes her testimony again now, right? Like that's going to be a huge issue. And I know they have a really strong rebuttal witness for that. So, I mean, I think it's a dead issue. It doesn't make any sense. Again, I understand what they're doing tactically with the dog bites. They're trying to place him in the house because, like I said before, and I think we can all agree if we're being reasonable and honest, nothing places that man in that house, right? So in order for this to work, in order for this third party culprit thing to work, they've boxed themselves in. They need to get him in that house somehow. So the dog, I think, is another attempt to do so. But I mean, obviously there's issues with the with the wounds themselves. I'm not an expert, but I mean, it doesn't look like dog bites to me. There's no puncture marks there that a dog usually would. You don't see the pattern for a jaw. There's no dog DNA, which I think is a huge issue for that theory. And, again, nothing places him in the house. So how did the dog get to him, right? How did the dog get to him?
So I don't think they need to place anybody in the house. I just think they have to prove, they just have to show that there's reasonable doubt whether Karen Reed actually killed him. So, again, if you want to try to prove a conspiracy, then yeah, you got to prove that he's in the house. But to me, that would not be my approach. The approach is, can the Commonwealth prove that Karen Reed backed her car into John O'Keefe and killed him that way? Is
But
there any other
is their
possibility?
approach, right? That is their approach with this. Really,
The
is that,
Commonwealth,
you know.
the Commonwealth's approach. Yeah, but yeah. So, and when it comes to the lack of DNA, Kate, you know, you were saying that the lack of DNA you think is just too overwhelming to overcome, and that's kind of how I feel the lack of bruising on the arm. You know, that's too overwhelming for me to overcome, to say that a car hit her. You know, so you can't, you know, like you're kind of playing the lack of DNA. I'm saying, well, use the same logic and say the lack of bruising to the arm, the lack of
I think
fracture.
I think the state does have
And
to
then
do a better job.
let me just finish the point. And then also, in terms of Dr. Marie Russell testifying, again, there's been no expert who's the Commonwealth has hired up until now. Could be they're going to, by the second trial they will, but there's no expert
They've
that
hired him. He's already gone into
you
discovery.
know, for an ER doctor or someone who was a medical examiner to say that no, these are not consistent with a dog bite. These are much more consistent with a car backing into his arm. And yeah, the question, Kevin, about you know, the space between the two linear abrasions, where one part could be a dog bite, the other part is a dog bite, but they're far apart. She explained that, you know, skin's elastic, it stretches, it moves. You're trying to defend yourself. You know, it makes sense that this can all happen. And
Well, there was also no wounds on the other side of the arm. So
yeah, I know. I mean, sure.
I'm assuming the dog has a dog
Sure,
has an
there's
upper
no.
and a lower. You know.
Yeah,
So
I know,
mean,
right? I mean, that's part of it. But again, she said that that's not dispositive, meaning that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a dog. Just because there's no bite marks on the other side of the arm, it doesn't mean that the dog didn't get the front part of the arm or scratched or whatever it is. And I thought that her testimony, again, given her experience, definitely creates reasonable doubt. You know,
she's never before identified a dog bite on a corpse.
Right. That's, I mean,
that.
not just that, but her job is, I mean, her expertise is not in identifying these wounds. She, you know, came up with this sort of nebulous methodology of, pattern recognition, right? But she couldn't even really articulate that. And again, like doing a little bit of research on the rebuttal witness here, I think that what you're going to see is a much more holistic way of looking at this, where, you know, they've looked at the dog now, right? And part of that, and again, Jim Crosby is internationally recognized as an authority on this subject. He does, where Marie Russell has absolutely no experience, you know, as far as like forensically identifying dog bites or assisting prosecution with dog bite cases, dog bite fatalities. Jim Crosby does, right? So, I mean, again, I think that it makes sense that she's allowed to testify. She is a doctor. Just because she's a doctor, qualified and highly qualified are two different things. She's qualified, but I think that you know, when she was pushed on her methodology as well as her credentials, there's some vulnerability there. And I think that again, it's not just the lack of DNA, although that is, I mean, almost impossible, right? If I bite you, I'm leaving my DNA on you, right? There's no way around that. If a dog bites you, like, there's DNA in the mouth. They're leaving DNA. There's really no way around that. There is a little bit of way around a lack of bruising, again, depending on how the vehicle hit. He was out in the cold. That can retard the bruising process. There's a lot of variables there. I fail to see a variable where a bite is, you know, imparted on someone and no DNA is left behind. I don't think that's possible. And you can't
really never had a method. She really, by the time she made she did not use a methodology to make her conclusions, which she made very early on just by looking at it. Her methodology was an eyeball. Oh, those are parallel lines, so they must be some evidence of teeth or nails. That was it. And she said, I'm qualified to make that decision because of my experience. And that's it. Now she has tried to add, with the help of the new lawyer on the defense team, Alessi. She's trying to build a methodology now, but it's after the fact. When at the time that she reached out to the defense, she had no evidence except for that article from the Globe, and she had no methodology.
Well, okay, so I'm going to disagree with that, because I think she did have methodology. The methodology was in the research papers that she referenced and she relied on, and Robert Alessi went through with her. So there is a methodology here, that's clear, and it's pattern recognition.
There is now, but there wasn't when she made her conclusions. That's all I'm saying.
And it's questionable.
Okay, and there's pattern recognition, which has been relied on, and it's been accepted by the medical community. So there definitely is basis for what she's saying and what she's opining about. That's what I believe. And again, and she also did research into the topic. Now, generally speaking, just so we can put this one to bed a little bit, generally speaking, no one's really asked to determine whether something's a dog bite or not 99% of the time, because 99% of the time, you know it's a dog.
Right.
That's just what the facts of the case are. But there's very, very rarely where, hey, what is this? Let's get an expert. Okay, well, this is an expert who's testified in 100 different trials about whether this is a dog bite. It never happens. So you got to get an expert who's done enough research and relies on enough research papers to be able to determine whether this is, based on pattern recognition, pattern analysis, whether this could be it. And that's what she qualifies as. So that was part of the, I think, the argument, and which is why I think that she's definitely qualified. I don't think it was a close call, by the way. I think that was just kind of the Judge Canoni giving the other side a carrot, which does happen sometimes. By the way, I've seen sometimes where I'm 100% right, and then the judge would just kind of like feel bad for the other side. It's like, it's a close call, Mr. Radner, but we're gonna give you this one. Just to kind of.
That's a matter of perception, right?
So,
I don't know how you perceive yourself, so I don't know.
Yeah, but also just in terms of.
Yeah, I don't see that with Canoni. Yeah.
Okay, let me just finish off with what Kevin was saying, that how she got involved with the case. I don't find that so suspect, because when you do have specialized knowledge in a certain area and there's a high profile case going on, and you're like, hey, nobody else can really testify about this, and I can really shed light on it. This is one of the things that I specialize in. I can determine whether it's a dog bite or not without even determining it before. And she said that she didn't determine it before. She just said, hey, this is right up my alley. Give me the information and I'll come to a conclusion. And that's kind of what happened. She didn't come to her conclusion before she reviewed all the materials.
She reached out to the defense.
I
think she had a conclusion because she reached out to the defense.
Well, that doesn't mean that she has a conclusion. That means I can
not necessarily, but it's a powerful indicator, I think. And just coincidentally, she reached out to the defense through the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office, where Alan Jackson used to work, and there was some strangeness in the voir dire about how their communications first began. And Alan Jackson said, well, it doesn't really matter. So there are a lot of little kind of red flags here. I think it's also important to say that in this very high-profile case, Alan Jackson, one of the most prominent defense attorneys in the country, for a year of building the claim that this was from a dog bite, they could not find an expert until she suddenly emerged in the middle of the trial.
Well, I don't know if that's true, because also that other doctor, the medical examiner, forgot his name right now, that the guy with the glass.
Yeah.
What's his name?
Dr.
Sheridan. Yeah, Dr. Sheridan. I mean, he testified that it was much more consistent with a dog attack, animal attack, than a car accident. So, they had him. I think that this is just.
Then again, he also, under cross, kind of buckled, and one thing that he was not aware of, and it was the lack of dog DNA, which again, I think is, I can't think of a scenario where any living creature bites you and doesn't leave DNA behind. And, DNA can solve cases 20 years after the fact, right? So, it lasts for a while, and you've got those swabs being done. And I know that Dr. Marie Russell, which again, I think cuts to her credibility when she is arguing to her conclusion, right? So saying, well, something went wrong with the DNA collection. She can't articulate what. She has no evidence that anything went wrong, but she immediately goes down that path. And again, there's no evidence that anything went wrong with that DNA collection. You can't say that the shirt was washed or laundered. Nothing supports that. And in addition, they did find pig DNA, which was explained most likely came from food, right? So there was DNA on the shirt, just no canine DNA. And I don't know of any process that can selectively wash off certain DNA and leave others behind. That is a huge, I think, insurmountable. If you're aware of a scenario where a living creature can bite and not leave any DNA, I would love to hear about it.
Yeah, no, I've said on the channel a bunch of times, I think that the lack of DNA is a good point for the Commonwealth. It's definitely an argument for the Commonwealth to make. Again, I don't think that it's dispositive. I don't think that it completely destroys Dr. Marie Russell, because it's very clear to her that these are dog bites. So what happened? Well, the shirts were, his clothing was sitting in the snow for hours and hours and hours, and was sitting in the corner of a hospital room, all soaked, sopping wet. What type of effect would that have? What type of contamination? All the traveling with the thing could have, and maybe we'll wipe off some DNA and leave other DNA. That I don't think it's insurmountable. I don't think it's. It's not. I don't think it has to be selectively. But the question you have to answer is why is there no DNA? Well, look what happened to the shirt, and look what happened, till it actually got to a lab 3 months later. What are the chances of contamination? So I don't think it completely is insurmountable, like what you're saying. Mm-hmm. I think it's an argument that the Commonwealth can make, but I don't think it completely destroys the credibility of Dr. Marie Russell.
Can I ask you a question on this, Martin? So if Dr. Russell had come forward and said, you know, these look like maybe they could be dog bites, right? That would have been probably somewhat credible, right? Because we don't know what they are. You're looking at really shallow wounds that are just pictures on a corpse. They could be a lot of things they could be, right? And if she made that, but she said, and she said in the first trial too, despite a lack of methodology back then, that she was sure to a degree of medical certainty that these were dog bites. Isn't that a little bit suspicious to you? You look at how could you really, every other dog bite expert that we've seen, at least on TV, talk about this, have basically said you can't look at just a photo of that and make that determination. You can't. You have to know everything else, all the other circumstances in it. So to me, doesn't that find it odd to you? Like if she said maybe these are dog bites or these could be dog bites, I'd find that credible. But because she said that they look similar to patterns I've seen before. But other things can create all kinds of things can create linear patterns like that, parallel lines and shallow abrasions and stuff like that. But she was certain to a degree of medical certainty, and that's what I find to be not credible.
Okay, I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I think that she was saying that it was, from her experience of 30 years of treating people and having a special affinity for dog bites and research on dog bites, she can come to that medical conclusion. So I didn't find that too strange. Okay, we're kind of running a little bit late, so I just want to see if we can. I don't even know where we are, and I don't mean any disrespect for anyone who's been generous to give some of the donations here and the super chats. I appreciate it, and I'm sorry if I'm not getting to you, but let me put this one up. Here we go. Fraud $2. Love Kate and Kevin, award-winning YouTubers. There you go. See, it's not just Pro Brother Counsel.
I don't know what award I won.
$5 would have been great for the Commonwealth if they did search the house and found nothing. That would have been helpful, right?
That's what Brian Albert said on the stand.
Yeah, I wish they would have, right? And then Alan Jackson said, well, it sounds like that was a little rehearsed. Period, full stop. Show Plum's recreational video, please. Not sure what that is.
I can explain it to you. I wouldn't have sent it to you, but here's the thing. This is why they're so eager to destroy people by accusing me of faking cancer and everything else. So but we've talked about how all of us, I think, probably looked at the injuries and tried to, in our amateur way, because none of us are accident reconstructionists, understand John's injuries versus the damage on the car and things like that and try to explain it. So about a year and a half ago, in trying to understand it, and I didn't know what the state's theory was. So I'm thinking that maybe the theory was that his head somehow broke the taillight. And so I'm like, well, how could that happen without leaving major injuries to the shoulder or the back? So I came up with a theory that maybe he had got out of the car, he dropped his phone because Jen texted him, and he had a cocktail glass in one hand. So as he's reaching up, bent over to pick it up, that's when she put it in reverse and it clipped his head. So it's really just clipped the back of it as he was bent over. So I had a video made on that, but it was just a way of arguing over that theory. I don't believe it. And, but that's all they got on me. So they love that. Either that or I'm faking cancer, whatever else they can come up with.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I don't know anything. I'm kind of out of it. I'm just trying to cover the case myself, but It's nice to meet with you. Okay. So here we go. We got Kate Peters is an intelligent, well-spoken, wonderful woman, loving all three panel members. There you go, Kate.
Oh,
she is brilliant.
Despite
what she says.
$1.99. Why invite half dozen people to your murder scene? Okay, there's another point. Again, that's part of it if it's a conspiracy. Red Solo Cups. Scene not secured. House not searched. Missing Sally Port video. Missing library video. Missing ring video. No one saw her.
Missing library video.
People saw her arrive and leave too much doubt. Okay. I'm just getting through these comments.
Yeah, I was going to say.
No, I know, but
I know you got to blow through it, but I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, like I think we discussed a lot of this, But let's see if there's anything. The two just straight up lie wild. Okay, well, I think we still had a nice conversation here.
See, if we don't agree with them, we must be lying. That's how they think.
I think part of this comes down to, unfortunately, like the case is saturated social media in such a way that you'll hear things that were thrown out at some point. A lot of it wasn't admissible or it was debunked, but it's still like it's pervasive, right? And then just like a fundamental misunderstanding of what's going on. I mean, I did notice in the chat at some points, like when I said, that Canone had those off the record notes in camera and was reviewing them, right? People are saying, well, what, did you talk to her? The Commonwealth is leaking. And no, I check the docket on a regular basis and it's on the docket, right? But I understand that not everybody is doing that, and I don't expect everybody to do that. But the problem is when you have a lot of people that aren't doing that, a lot of disinformation tends to spread, and there's a lot of confusion here. So
This is why you're doing a great job, Martin, because this is a place. No, seriously. People live, I'd mentioned earlier, in their echo chambers, but now you've got people here from both sides, although probably largely from one side, but they're hearing a lot of things that they have no idea that these were explained. So, for instance, for a year, for more, we were told that it was really suspicious that they towed Karen's Lexus to the Sally Port. We were told it was suspicious that the evidence of John's clothing was not logged into the state police system until 6 weeks after John was found. But all of these things have perfect, mundane, simple explanations. And people don't want to wait for those explanations. They don't want to learn. They don't want to understand. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, I mean, there's a few more here I want to get to, and I'm sorry. Let's just get to this.
Yeah.
You can literally see the puncture marks on his elbow. KP has never owned a dog, although she is one. That's not nice to say.
I have a dog. Like everybody knows I have a dog. You can hear him in the background when I stream most of the time. He doesn't bite, but I mean, I have had a dog that bites before. I've had a lot of dogs.
This guy's being paid by Karen Reed, and then some Hebrew words. This is coming from me, a true Israeli. So that's what some people have called me also when I cover the Adelson case sometimes. One of these, it's also, you know about the Adelson case or no?
Yes, I'm familiar with the Adelson case.
Yeah, so anytime I say anything that could be construed as an argument, for the defense, I get accused of being hired by the Adelson PR team.
Well, I also I'm simultaneously the most trashy, abominable person alive, and I'm also in charge of the entire Commonwealth, and I do PR, so.
Right. Okay. Well, I guess that's going to do it for the show. I really appreciate you guys coming on. I think that we've proven our case here, that you can have a reasonable conversation, a respectful conversation with people that disagree. And maybe minds have been changed during this conversation. Maybe we'll go home and sleep on it, and you'll reach out to me, and maybe I'll reach out to you and say, I've had thought about what you said, and then I have a change of my mind. So,
can I ask you one question before we go?
Sure.
Do you condemn the witness intimidation that is prevalent in this case?
So I can't comment about things I don't know much about. And I like to base my information on what I see in trial, as you know, or evidentiary hearings, things that are said under oath, and things that are just in affidavits or filings in the court. I really don't think that it's fair for me to give an opinion on, because I always tell everybody I base my opinion on what I see in trial under the scrutiny of someone taking an oath, and then I can talk about it. But I don't know what's going on with the witness intimidation claim.
Well, it's all on video, so we can send it to you actually, and you can observe it for yourself.
Yeah. So if you do, and then I do the research on the law and see whether it qualifies or not, then I can definitely give opinion about it. But I don't know enough about it. I haven't been concentrating so much on the Turtle Boy stuff. I've been concentrating more on the Karen Reed stuff. So
well, Karen Reed is involved as well. So I mean, it's quite intertwined, right?
Okay. Well, I mean, if you send me the video, I can do some research.
I'll send you some information. No problem.
Take a look. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Kate and Kevin, and that will be it for everybody. Hope everybody has a great night, and thanks for joining us. And who knows, maybe we'll do this again another time. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much.